from Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast with Phil Sanchez. UnPHILtered.
All right, thank you for joining us on the show. Donald Rainwater is our guest today. Donald, good to see you, the Libertarian candidate for governor. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Before we get into policy, Donald, let's go into your background. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. So I was born here in Indianapolis back in 1963, raised on the east side. My parents built a house out in Greenfield. We spent about 3 years out there when I was in elementary school. Then we moved back to the east side. I graduated from Warren Central High School. My father was a United Auto worker out at the Ford plant when it was still there.
Yeah.
My mother was a stay-at-home parent.
Yep.
And I've got one brother. He probably would prefer that I didn't acknowledge him, but I do have one younger brother. And so I graduated in 1981, went to a semester of college. My father got laid off for the entire month of December my freshman year, so I came home, tried to figure out what I wanted to do, ended up joining the United States Navy, spent 8 years in the Navy as an enlisted man. And then when I got out of the Navy, I got into teaching computer classes at a vocational college. I spent some time helping somebody build a computer maintenance business. Spent some time managing a rent-to-own store on the near east side of Indianapolis, around the 10th and rural area. And then got into computer training again, and that led me into software development, database development administration, and then kind of worked my way up into application development management, product management, and now I'm a project manager.
Well, there you go. How'd you get into politics?
That's an interesting story, and I'll try to do the condensed version. I used to work down at the Indiana Government Center as a contractor. I was a service delivery manager for a software quality assurance company. And as I would drive up and down Meridian Street on my way back and forth to work, I would hear on the radio where the Indiana General Assembly wanted to raise the cigarette tax $2. This was back, I believe, in 2015.
Right.
And they said they wanted to do that to raise money for the roads and to encourage people to stop smoking. Now, I looked at that as kind of a red herring. I said, you know, you can do one or the other. But if you're raising money for the roads, that means people are smoking. If you're convincing people not to smoke, then you're not going to raise money for the roads with that tax.
Right.
Saying that you're trying to do both, either, you know, one of us is probably being played for a fool. And it kind of upset me. So I decided that it was time to get off the couch and get involved, because I feel like we're no longer represented by our government. They're kind of taking our money and doing what they want to with it and then pulling the wool over our eyes. And I decided it was time to try to put a stop to that.
Up until that point, were you a Republican, a Democrat,
I was an independent voter who normally voted for either Republican candidates or Libertarian candidates.
Okay.
Obviously, there were more Republican candidates to vote for.
Right.
So I would consider myself an independent. I don't ever remember casting a vote for a Democrat. My father, being a United Auto worker, talked a lot about the Democrat platform because that's what he was fed at work. But we also, growing up, we went to church every time the doors opened. And so I got, back in the late 70s, early 80s, they used to refer to the religious right, and I got a steady diet of that as well. So I grew up being able to kind of critically think through the positives and the negatives of both sides of those arguments. And of course, today, I feel like both sides are much more extreme than what they were in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up.
I think we can all agree on that one. So did that bring you to the Libertarian Party? 2015, when you're driving up and down Meridian Street and you're listening to the radio and you're getting a little annoyed with what's going on, when you looked at the landscape, did you say, I don't really find myself being with the Republicans anymore, and I definitely don't find myself with the Democrats, let me look at the Libertarians?
Well, I looked around I looked at several different parties and looked for what I thought was the closest to my interpretation of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Because here again, I believe, for better or for worse, the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and those who founded the state of Indiana wrote the state constitution as a means to limit government, not to limit individual rights, not to dictate morality necessarily, but to limit government. And so what I wanted to find was a political identity that I felt most closely matched that for me, and the Libertarian Party is where I found that.
Okay, when you make that decision, what happens next? Where do you go from there?
So I had decided that I wanted to run for office at that point. When I originally looked at it, I decided that I was going to run for either state representative or state senate. I found out that my state senator at the time was Luke Kenley, who was the crafter of the budget. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at the way finances were done with the state government, I decided that I was going to run against Luke Kenley because I didn't agree with the way the state budget was crafted or how it was spent.
How'd that go?
Well, we learned a lot. We learned a lot. I spent a lot of time walking around and knocking on doors, talking to prospective voters. We spent a lot of time during early voting standing out in front of the Hamilton County Courthouse, introducing ourselves to voters, and we got about 4%.
Yeah.
Back then, I did not know how to raise money. I didn't understand that our political system is dependent upon money, mm-hmm. which is unfortunate, but it's the world we live in. And so I did a lot of what folks like to refer to as retail politics and learned a lot.
So you get 4% of the vote. A lot of people would say, I'm done. I'm not doing this again. But you kept moving forward, right?
Well, I have children and grandchildren. Yep. And Phil, to be honest with you, I tell people all the time, the Indiana I grew up in doesn't exist anymore, and that really bothers me. And I want to preserve the freedoms that we have for my children and grandchildren and the posterity after I'm gone. And I can't do that if I listen to people say you can't win, or it's too hard to raise money, or if it's important enough to do, it's important enough to do, period.
Right. No, that's well said. From that election, what was your next attempt at politics?
2 years later, we ran for state representative. Mm-hmm. And that was a three-way race, and I believe I got about 5% of the vote there. Yeah. Here again, learning a lot, not knowing a lot. And one of the things I think that is incumbent upon people, if you're going to get involved, is you've got to get out there, you've got to find out, first of all, how to articulate your message. Mm-hmm. How to reach voters, and I make no bones about the fact that it's hard to learn, yeah. And you don't always have people that you can lean on. Sometimes you just have to get out there and figure it out on your own.
Okay. All right. And where'd you go from there?
Well, the year after 2018, when I ran for state representative, after that, I was going to run for Westfield City Council.
Right.
The gentleman that was the incumbent got beat in the primary. And quite frankly, the gentleman that beat him, I looked at him and said, I don't need to run against him. I think he'll do a pretty good job. And so I went and pulled my paperwork, and somebody called me and said, I see you pulled your paperwork for city council. And I said, yeah, I feel like the guy that won the primary is well, would you be interested in running for mayor of Westfield? Because there are a group of us who are very displeased with the current mayor, and none of them wanted to run,
Right.
but they thought maybe I would. And I said, well, yes, I'll run for mayor. I understand what the issues are and why people are unhappy, and I can agree with that. Yes, I'll run for mayor. So I ran for mayor of Westfield in a two-way race against the incumbent, and received 40% of the vote.
Yeah, I remember that election. You don't live in Westfield anymore. You moved. We talked about this
Yes,
off air.
we moved down to southern Johnson County. I wanted to be in a more rural setting. I like to be out where I feel like if I want to go out and throw a rod and reel in the lake and lose it, I can do that.
Yeah. Running for governor again here, right? I mean,
Yes.
last time, how'd it go last time?
Well, I think we did pretty well for considering the fact that here again we were in a pandemic.
Yep.
Didn't have the opportunity to do a lot of the appearances and a lot of the media opportunities that you would normally get as a gubernatorial candidate because of the pandemic. Sure. But we were able to get our message out, and we got about 11.4% of the vote,
Yep.
which was about 345,567 votes, I believe it was. And we did that with about $408,000.
Wow.
And most of that money was raised after the 1st of September. So, we
If I'm not mistaken, I don't mean to cut you off, that was
No.
the most ever, as far as percentage-wise goes, ever for a Libertarian, right?
that was the highest vote total or percentage
Yeah.
by a Libertarian in a statewide three-way race.
Wow. That's pretty good.
So we did all right.
Yeah.
And I think it's because people in general are beginning to see that government isn't what it should be in Indiana, and they want change. And they're willing to embrace the change they want, regardless of the party label that goes with it.
Is that what you're hearing on the campaign trail this time around?
Yes, absolutely. I've run into a lot of people, done a lot of county fair tents, and run into a lot of people who came up to me and said, I voted for you in 2020, and the options this year aren't any better than they were then, and you've got my vote. I've also had people walk up to me, and this is what shocks me.
Yeah.
I've had people walk up to me and say, first of all, I want to tell you I didn't vote for you in 2020. I didn't know about you until I saw the debates. Then I saw you, and I kicked myself ever since because I voted early voting and didn't know, and so I didn't vote for you, but I'm voting for you this time. And it's always the same conversation.
Right.
It's that the options now aren't any better than the options then. In my opinion, we have a political system that has become complacent because they believe that voters have become complacent. So they don't if you look at the primary, I think the number was 18%.
Something like
voter
that. Close.
turnout.
Yeah.
That's horrible. But that is from people saying it doesn't matter what I do when I vote in a primary. They're going to give me whatever they're going to give me.
No.
So I feel like we need options for folks.
Okay, so how do you think it's going to go come November for you?
Well, I would like to say that on November 5th, I'll have the highest percentage of the vote and become the next governor of the state of Indiana. I won't know until we get there exactly how we're going to do, because between now and then, a lot of things could happen.
Right.
There's a lot of opportunity out there. There are a lot of folks who maybe will decide to donate that haven't donated yet. And there's always something that could change the way people perceive the candidates in an election.
Sure. Donations up this time around?
They are up from where they were this time 4 years ago.
4 years ago. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's talk about policy real quick, Donald. And I don't want to keep you too long here, because everything I'm reading, and you and I talked about this a little before, is cut. Taxes. That's kind of the backbone of what your policies are, right?
Absolutely.
What do you say to people, because I'm seeing abolish state income tax, I'm seeing reforming and reducing residential and agricultural property tax, freezing state budget, excise tax, gasoline excise tax. A lot of people probably agree with a lot of that, but then they're also told, hey, how are we going to pay for stuff? So what is your response because I'm sure you get that question.
Yes, absolutely I do, and I think it's a very legitimate question. I just wish we would ask it of our state government and not say, how will we pay for stuff? I would say, why aren't we asking, what are we paying for now? Because, for example,
then to be fair, what they'll say is, we're paying for schools, we're paying for roads, we're paying for police, we're paying for fire, we're paying for our parts of our everyday lives.
Right, and my response to that would be, so they say. What I would like to see is some detail.
Okay.
In 2019, the state budget was, I want to say around $16 billion state spending from the general fund.
Right.
In 2023, it was $26 billion. We have increased our state spending $10 billion, $20 billion if you add in the federal money that we're given.
Okay.
So just out of state general fund spending, in 5 years, we've increased by $10 billion. That's a pretty big jump. And I have heard folks who are currently involved in government say that government should never spend more than it can take in. And they call that a conservative point of view. I would say that's not a conservative point of view. The conservative point of view should be government never spends more than it absolutely needs to do its job. And what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is that they've figured out how to extract more and more money from Hoosiers, and then they go and spend it. And so what I tell folks is, it's not enough for government to say, well, 50% of the budget goes to education. Show me where. Show me where, because 50% of the budget is not going to the classroom. It's not affecting students directly. It's not going into teachers' salaries. Where's it going?
Right.
And then we, the people, need to make the determination as to whether or not we think our money, because I don't believe in public money, it's our money, they took it from us, and we should say, that's being spent appropriately, that is not. But we don't do that. We let them craft this gigantic budget, and they post it on the in.gov website, but we don't look at it.
So you want more of a breakdown?
I do. I want us as citizens to hold government accountable for how it's spending our money. We
to your point, speaking from a journalistic perspective, it is very difficult to find exactly where dollar for dollar where it goes.
Absolutely. And they want it that way. As a matter of fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they just passed legislation to make it harder for, I can't remember the gentleman's title now, but basically to make it harder for government to be transparent.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that troubling. And I think every citizen should find it troubling when your legislature is passing legislation to make it harder for you to know what's really going on.
Okay.
It is supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Right.
I believe at every level of government, that's no longer the case. And if we, the people, have decided that we would just prefer for government to bleed us dry of our money, and then whatever we get back, I guess that's okay. That's up to each individual, but I don't think that's the way we as free people should want to live.
What if you were to get some answers from if there was to be a list specifically where money's going, and then you were to do the math and say, okay, well, maybe cutting all these taxes isn't the best way about it. What would you then do? Or do you really just think that this is the way to go?
Well, I think first of all, based on a lot of the research that I've done, let's take, for example, property taxes.
Go ahead.
I've said, let's make property taxes 1% of the purchase price of your property, and after 7 years, you're done. And people say, well, but what about fire, police, and schools? And I say, well, if we were really worried about that, we would have never let the General Assembly create tax increment financing districts. We wouldn't let them take the increment that increases every year and divert that to economic development, because it's not going to fire, police, and schools. And so all I'm doing is saying what we need to do is focus the money that my plan would keep on fire, police, and schools. And then if we need additional funding, then we have a transparent, intelligent conversation about how else do we fund those services. Yeah. Because the reality is that taxing somebody's property or taxing their income, to me, is completely contrary to the idea of individual liberty. If you can't own your property because the government can always take it from you, Madison said that property was one of the pillars of liberty.
Right.
And so we've got to start the conversation. And if starting the conversation is, well, if we'll get in here and fix what we're wasting and what we're spending that we shouldn't be spending, we can cut all those taxes.
Is legalizing marijuana something you would be in favor of?
Absolutely. I believe that cannabis in all its forms, medical, recreational, should be legal, should be decriminalized, because here again, in the state of Indiana, tobacco is legal, bourbon is legal, beer is legal, wine is legal. I have my suspicions as to why we don't legalize cannabis, and I don't think it's because there hasn't been enough research done or because the federal government hasn't taken it off of Schedule 1.
Want to share what you think it is?
Well, I think that there are economic factors that don't want the competition.
Got it. Where do you stand on a woman's right?
Well, I am a pro-life libertarian. I believe that the non-aggression principle indicates that we need to protect those who cannot protect themselves.
Fair enough. Your thoughts on your opponents?
Well, let me say it this way.
Go ahead.
I find it interesting that we have a Democrat who used to be a Republican statewide office holder. We have a Republican that voted Democrat before they decided to run for office. And here I am stuck in the middle with you.
We'll leave it there. Donald Rainwater, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to having you in studio for our debate coming up this fall.
Absolutely looking forward to it.
Thank you, sir.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast with Phil Sanchez. Unfiltered. In-depth, nonpartisan coverage. Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.